Hello, welcome to Issues with Cartoons, the show where we dissect cartoons and the comics that inspire them. My name is Carl.
And I am Kyle.
And today we're discussing Part 2 of Earth's Mightiest Heroes Breakout, Episode 2.
Our first two-parter, our first Part 2 of a two-parter, the second part of the premiere of Earth's Mightiest Heroes following the mini-sodes that we've covered in previous installments of Issues with Cartoons. This time, still written by Chris Yost and Josh Fine, but now we have Vinton Hyek on directorial duties. And this is the episode where it all comes together. All these things we've been building to, all these characters we've been following, they meet and they solve a problem that no hero could solve on their own. And this is also, for the second time, an episode where we have the lineup of Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, Ant-Man, and the Wasp appear in that intro credits scene.
Yeah, they changed the opening sequence in accordance with what characters are in the episodes,
exactly,
essentially.
Yeah. And we have the Founders still. And again, if you missed last episode, go back and listen so you can know what happened in Part 1. And so you can listen to our coverage of Avengers Issue 1 from 1963, which featured this lineup. And that is carried over in here. Again, one more reason why I think as an Avengers fan, Earth's Mightiest Heroes does kind of edge out the MCU for me in terms of Avengers adaptations, because it is very much, it's adhering to that original roster. And I really love this lineup of characters.
It's a great homage to it, to have it 100%.
And the circumstances that bring these characters together is very different than it was in 1963, but it does have comic book precedent. So in the second half of this episode, we will be covering the Breakout storyline from New Avengers number 1, which happened 41 years after Avengers number 1 was published in 2004. So the creators of the show are marrying concepts from classic Marvel, from contemporary Marvel, from Ultimate Marvel, even elements of the very young Marvel Cinematic Universe, marrying all those elements to create a unique show with its own premise, its own stories, its own stakes, its own characterizations.
Yeah, and we've discussed the Ultimates a lot on this show and made comparisons to Earth's Mightiest Heroes with things like Nick Fury.
Yes.
And stuff. And it's interesting to me that the new Avengers issues were written by Bendis.
Yep.
Who did not write Ultimates, but he had a pretty huge hand in creating the Ultimate Universe with Ultimate Spider-Man. So I just want to bring that up.
And to your point, one of the issues we discussed covering that kind of got on the cutting room floor was Ultimate Team number 5, which was the first appearance of Ultimate Nick Fury. It was also the origin of Ultimate Iron Man. And another thing to note, too, is that Bendis was involved in the creative committee that was a liaison between Marvel Publishing and Marvel Studios in the early days of Marvel, when Kevin Feige would have Mark Millar and Joe Quesada and Brian Bendis and a few other people come in and consult on story and breaking story. And really interesting that Bendis' name is kind of in the mix with a lot of these adaptations. But here we are, we're actually not picking up where we left off, because we are actually starting in a flashback 10 years ago.
We get Graviton's origin.
We get the origin of Dr. Franklin Hall Graviton, and they're actually tying it into the Super Soldier program, which is an interesting device to say that we're trying to build Captain America. So again, Captain America does kind of fit into the mix with this origin of the Avengers. And they're trying to use different means to create a super soldier program, and so they're hiring Dr. Franklin Hall to create something with gravity. And of course, like every Marvel science experiment, it goes wrong, and he becomes this power-mad, gravity-controlling supervillain. But they subdue him pretty quickly when he was first on the scene, and they end up imprisoning him.
They do. I liked a lot of the shots in this of him destroying the room and stuff.
Oh, the visual effects of gravity were very interesting.
Great. It felt very inspired. It was a very inspired moment in the episode, and it's impressive to me because, like we said last time, Graviton's not really celebrated. He's like a C-list character, if that. It's interesting what they did with him. I would bet that there are plenty of Marvel Comics fans who don't know who Graviton is.
Sure.
But again, good on them for pulling a deep cut and making it work for their story, because he is a formidable threat in this. So after we kind of see the experiment gone wrong, he blames Nick Fury for his circumstances, because Nick Fury is the one who subdues him and imprisons him underneath the raft. And then somehow he wakes up, doesn't know what year it is, doesn't know how long he's been out. He's grown a big man beard and long hair and is disoriented. We get a shot of the raft during the breakout, and we actually see Wendigo for a moment.
Yeah.
And then we're off to the races.
Wendigo was fun. I mean, I always think of Wendigo from Wolverine's first appearance, because the Hulk is fighting Wendigo, and
180 and 181, right?
Yeah, classic story.
Yep, I know Wendigo from Peter David's Captain Marvel series from the early 2000s, but that is my only other touchstone. But yeah, so last episode I had thought I had seen the Hulk talking to Bruce Banner in the diner in that episode, but it was actually this episode where we get this really cool scene where the Hulk and Banner are speaking to each other, and no one else can hear Banner speak, but the Hulk is in this diner with Absorbing Man, I think, and he's talking to a window, and everyone else around him is like, what is this giant green monster doing? And he's talking to Banner.
He's having a conversation with himself.
Yeah,
his inner thoughts,
and Bruce is basically guilting the Hulk to get involved and to help out.
I love that part, and it's back to Hulk being puny Banner and all that classic stuff we see, but it adds a lot of interest to Hulk instead of just being this big raging monster. There's some real conflict inside.
And Peter David, who I mentioned did the Captain Marvel series, Peter David did a lot of work on the psychosis of Bruce Banner.
He did.
And the psychosis of the Incredible Hulk, and how that dynamic plays internally. And
he was the first author to add the context that Bruce's father was abusive to him.
Right, which was heavily featured in the Ang Lee film.
Yeah, that was one of the main plots, but it's Bruce Banner's abusive to him, or Bruce Banner's father's abusive to him, and that's what creates the anger of the Hulk.
Right.
Which is,
So obviously that internal dynamic is very important to the Hulk, and something that I think is missing sometimes from MCU Hulk.
It's not there, yeah.
Yeah, very rarely do you get any of it. You get a glimpse of it in Infinity War with Mark Ruffalo. But outside of that, not a whole lot. So great to see it here. We then cut back to the harbor where Graviton is basically asserting himself and calling for Nick Fury to show up. We get our first appearance of Giant Man in the show, where Hank goes big. And then Fury comes out and says, no one else needs to be hurt. Your problem is with me. Deal with me. And Graviton crushes him, and it's revealed to be an LMD, a life model decoy.
Yeah, I have them in my notes here.
In true Fury fashion.
Shocking. Yeah, that's so much like that Jim Steranko issue we looked at. We're oh, I'm not actually Fury. I'm wearing a mask.
Over and over again in our coverage of classic Nick Fury, misdirection is the move.
Yeah.
That Nick Fury did. Going back to Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos #1, misdirection is his strategy. And it's so, and again,
it was a great moment in the cartoon.
Great moment.
It was a lot of fun.
And he's a spy, and he's a calculating guy, and he's trying to be 2 to 3 steps ahead of everybody, and this is an example of that. Really, really fun. And then Graviton lifts up Manhattan in a scene that reminded me a lot of Age of Ultron. Did that play for you that way?
I didn't associate with that, but I do like Age of Ultron. I like James Spencer as Ultron. That movie gets
James
a lot
Spader,
of,
yes.
Yeah, James Spader. A lot of people give that movie flack, but I really like his performance in that.
Oh, his performance is great.
Yeah.
Apparently, he's coming back for the Vision series they're making for Disney Plus, but that's I don't know if that's official or not, but that's what I've been led to understand.
I would love that.
That would be great. He was great.
Mm-hmm.
He, in a movie that was maybe not all living up to the hype of the first one, I thought he was not the problem. He was a very strong part of that movie.
Oh yeah, he carried it. It was great.
But anyway, going back to this, the perfect setup line. Graviton honestly should have just kept his mouth shut, because of course what you are going to hear after saying, "I'm the strongest one there is the Hulk coming at you.
And he says, "No, I'm the strongest there is."
Right.
There's a little bit of that.
Yeah, a little bit of assertion of dominance there. And then you get this great fight with Hulk and Ant-Man there. Thor is underwater.
I have in my notes, I love the shot of Giant Man falling. I thought they animated that really well. They have him fall down in steps, and there's separate smoke plumes for each part of his body.
I didn't
falling.
notice that. That's brilliant.
Yeah, it looked great. Yeah, really
this show's visuals are very strong.
They're on point.
They are very strong. And Vinton Heck, I think, directed. Did he direct The Man on the Anthill? I can't remember. But he and Sebastian Montez have kind of been trading off directorial duties for a lot of these, and they're both very, very accomplished, very talented. I do think it's interesting. This is maybe something we should track as the show goes along.
Sure.
Ant-Man, super useful, super effective. Giant Man seems to fall a lot. And I'll just...
Yeah, no, Ant-Man is more successful.
Keep our eye on that, because I think Giant Man you think is going to be the most effective one because he's the bigger one, but it kind of just ends up being a bigger target.
It's taken down fairly quickly.
Yeah. But, Graviton is knocking these people around this shipyard, and is kind of winning the fight, has all of them pinned down, and somehow the Hulk is able to overcome the gravitational forces that are being put upon him, which is worrying the heck out of Graviton. But I love that demonstration of Hulk's power and his rage working against this seemingly all-powerful villain. Just really well made.
And we're getting our classic Avengers lineup featured.
Yeah,
really is kind of
they're all together now. Thor gets out from underwater, and they're all together. Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, and Ant-Man and the Wasp. And I do really like that when they're all pinned down, the one who kind of solves that problem is Ant-Man, because he gets the ants to bite Graviton. Worth noting too, Wasp is very effective in this fight, where she is zapping Graviton throughout the fight, and it hurts him. And I think he underestimates both Ant-Man and the Wasp, which of course you would. But they end up being pretty pivotal in this conflict.
Sure.
Which I appreciate.
More pivotal than they were in the comic when they were introduced, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, like we talked last episode.
Keep making comparisons there.
Yeah, well, you have to. And I think, yeah, like you say, they were kind of along for the ride. They end up closing the deal at the end. But beyond that, they weren't very involved. In this one, they're in the thick of it. Mm-hmm. In fact, they're first on the scene. They're there with Fury, trying to deal with the helicarrier problem.
Not to go too out of order, but there is a scene where Iron Man switches out his armor. It was Mach 7.
Yeah.
In the different... I know there's a lot of Marvel fans that keep... I'm not one of them, but I know there's a lot of Marvel fans that keep track of the different Machs of Iron Man's armor. So, Mach 7 was mentioned here.
I have too many things to remember all the armors. But if you are an Iron Man fan, write in and tell us, was this actually the Mach 7 armor from the comics? Because it looked just like another version of...
We'd love to know. I'd love to know that stuff.
It is very cool. Like, Iron Man, it makes sense why he's such a popular character. He's a very... I say the word toyetic. Like, he's a character that lends itself to that kind of toy collector mentality of, like, what features can you add, like, to this armor. Wasp ends up helping the Hulk, and he's surprised that Wasp is trying to, like, save him, and her response is, "Yeah, I am. Now go and hit him." And this is kind of an illustration of something I want us to follow too with the show is Wasp and Hulk are a pairing that don't really have much to do with each other in the comics, but in this show, one of the best pairings.
Right.
This spunky kind of silly, fun-loving sprite of a character with this big hulking ogre of a character have a really cool, fun dynamic where he's just kind of like her buddy, and and she just kind of sicks the Hulk on people, and it's really, really fun. And they finally do it. They finally subdue Graviton. You get this really great team shot of them kind of standing over him.
Yeah, and that was classic. That was reminiscent of that Avengers 1 final panel.
Yes.
The shot of them all standing together.
Yeah.
That was a callback to that, for sure.
For sure. And Thor says, "Let's go celebrate." And I couldn't help but think about the end of the 2012 movie when they go and get shawarma after. So I just imagine that after they beat Graviton, they went and got shawarma. But here we get the setup for the show, which is the breakout has happened. 74 villains are on the loose.
Yeah, they're all standing around this big hollow screen, and they're talking about all the villains that are escaping, and Fury's there, and Shield's there, and they're just we got to go after and capture these.
And
guys.
you bring up Nick Fury, and this is a point I wanted to bring up. This is the biggest deviation from the Ultimates and from the MCU, is that the Avengers make it a point to say, we are not working with S.H.I.E.L.D. on this.
Right, they're a separate team.
And again, I mentioned last episode at the end of the Avengers issue that Wasp is the one who names the team. And similarly, in this episode, the name Avengers comes from Wasp. She's the one who comes up with the name. That attention to detail speaks to what I love about this show. These are obviously fans, people who know the books inside and out, who know the lore inside and out. And that stuff might not seem to matter, but it is really cool. And it is really appreciated as someone who's a big fan of this stuff to come into a show and know that, like, that's such like a litmus test for do they know they're Avengers. They totally do. Wasp is the one who names them.
It's fun. I mean, they know the Marvel Universe backwards. I mean, we can see it from all the cameos we've seen and all the Easter eggs throughout. I think it's one of the things that me watching this for the first time makes it so fun, because we get mentions of the Fantastic Four. We get mentions of Logan from X-Men, the World War II flashback with Captain America. So many of the villains are in these setups for the prison scenes. It's all there.
And it's such a rich franchise, the Avengers, that it does make sense why the MCU centers around them so much. Part of that's due to legality and logistics at the time it was made, but also it's because it's a very fertile ground for stories. And this premise of supervillains on the loose and these superheroes are teaming up to go catch them, perfect springboard for an animated series.
Sure.
Definitely lends itself to an animated project, and is in fact the same springboard that the book we're going to talk about in the second half of the show utilizes. And when we come back, we will talk about the new Avengers series and the opening storyline Breakout.
More Bendis and more comics discussion after the break.
Welcome back. This is still Issues with Cartoons, episode 7, covering comics and the cartoons they inspire. We've just been covering the 2-part premiere of Earth's Mightiest Heroes called Breakout, which shares a title with the opening storyline of the relaunch from 2004 of the Avengers franchise by Brian Bendis and David Finch, titled The New Avengers. And I don't know, I know you were reading comics at the time, Carl, but for Avengers fans, this was a huge deal.
You know, just on the first page here, the recap,
Yep.
I was more of an X-Men boy.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I see the tie-in to House of M with Wanda and her losing control of her powers and no more mutants and all of that. And I understood that side of Marvel very well.
Yeah.
But this Avengers book was new to me.
You've not read it until today.
I had not read it.
So, for context, you mentioned House of M. And this book, and I didn't check dates, but I can tell you the order of the storylines. This book follows Avengers Disassembled, which was by the same creative team from the original numbering of the Avengers. From Volume 3 of the Avengers, which reclaimed the legacy numbering. So it was issue 500, I think, was the first issue of Avengers Disassembled. Or somewhere thereabouts. And it ended the original team of Avengers. It ended the volume that started with Perez and Busiek. Some other people worked on the book, and then Bendis took over and basically blew up Avengers Mansion, killed off a bunch of characters, and changed how we talk about the Scarlet Witch forever.
I will say, some of the message boards I was on at the time, people were mad about the Avengers Mansion blowing up.
The internet breaking, like, for me, I became familiar with the term broken internet over Hawkeye dying in Avengers Disassembled and Scarlet Witch losing her mind. I mean, it was very divisive. And it was Bendis' first story that he did was basically destroying the Avengers.
I know, and people were mad.
And he's talked since then, like on Word Balloon. I don't know if you ever listened to his Bendis tapes on Word Balloon. It's a great interview podcast that's been going on since 2005. But he's talked about how, in retrospect, it was kind of like someone invited him into their house and he immediately just destroyed the furniture. And he wonders if maybe he shouldn't have done a couple of things with the classic group before doing his own thing. But Marvel, at the time, was neck deep in Ultimates stuff. Ultimates, the book, I think debuted in 2003. Ultimate Spider-Man and Ultimate X-Men, I think, were 2000, 2001, somewhere thereabouts. Maybe Ultimates was even earlier. Maybe it was 2002. But they were getting some traction with that. The Avengers lineup and the Avengers stories that had come before New Avengers, I remember Chuck Austin was the writer at the time, who you, as an X-Men fan, are probably familiar with Chuck Austin a little bit. He did a lot of X-Men stuff in the 2000s.
He also did that War Machine series,
Yeah,
which is my favorite thing he's done. I've read some of that. It's good.
Do you know he's done some of the art on Miracle Man? Like the Alan Moore Miracle Man has some... Isn't that weird?
That's interesting.
Anyway, just a weird fact about Chuck Austin. But I think after Busiek left the Avengers, they were kind of trying to figure out what to do with the book. And I don't think they were getting the kind of success that they were looking for. Jeff Johns did one of those very few Marvel books. He did an Avengers run. Chuck Austin, I think, did the next longest one. But they were kind of floundering. At least this is how the story goes. They were trying to find a direction for the Avengers.
Sure.
And Joe Quesada, who was just coming into his editor-in-chief role, coming out of Marvel Knights.
And I love his era of Marvel.
Changed Marvel in a lot of ways for the better. As a Spider-Man fan, you may have some quabbles about it. But decided that if we're going to have a team of Earth's mightiest heroes, then to the person coming off the street, when you're reading a Marvel comic, who do you consider Earth's mightiest heroes? And if it's not Spider-Man and Wolverine, then why are you bothering? Was basically the thought. So
that's why this team is such a drastic departure.
And at the time,
before.
for Avengers fans, for Spider-Man fans, for X-Men fans, having Spider-Man and Wolverine on the team, very divisive, very controversial. And Spider-Man had been a reserve Avengers, I think, in the early 90s. He had been kind of associated with the team before. But the idea of him being a full-fledged member who, like, went to meetings and, like, was on regular missions.
That was frowned upon.
It was at the time.
There was a lot of fans that were like, Wolverine's not an Avenger. Spider-Man is not an Avenger.
And Spider-Man's role as a loner is addressed in the book. Like, they talk about, like, oh, I'm not a team member. And we'll get to that. But interesting that even they kind of acknowledge it. But when they were having the meeting, I guess Quesada was hearing all these traditionalists argue against putting these people on the team, and his response was, but what if they were? Like, Spider-Man's a loner. Well, yeah. So what if he's in a position where he has to be on the Avengers? What kind of character dynamics do you get? So you get Iron Man, Captain America, Spider-Man, Wolverine. You also get some...
Luke Cage.
You get Luke Cage, who at the time...
Jessica Jones.
The only person who was writing Luke Cage really consistently was Brian Bendis in Alias, like you mentioned, like in the Jessica Jones books. Before then, he had kind of not fallen into obscurity, but certainly he wouldn't have been someone who you would think would be a headliner for the Avengers. And his role in New Avengers is pretty substantial throughout the whole run.
Bendis writes him well here.
Oh, he does fun. A great Luke Cage.
Yeah, it's fun.
And read Alias, everybody. Alias is one of Bendis' best Marvel books. Incredible work with Michael Gaydos on art. He also snatches Jessica Drew Spider-Woman from obscurity. Because at the time, I mean, Julia Carpenter hadn't even been Spider-Woman at that point. I think they had moved on to Maddie Franklin. And then she had even kind of fallen away. So there was really no functioning Spider-Woman at the time. And so he brought in Jessica Drew, who, fun fact, I don't know if you know this, speaking of Alias was pitched as a Jessica Drew book. And he reconfigured it to be an original character, Jessica Jones.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting? Anyway, this cover, by the way, so memorable, very iconic with those partial silhouettes and that lightning strike in the background.
It gets job done. I like the red color palette. I like that it's mostly red. You know, it stands out.
Before we kind of dive into the specifics of the issue, what did you think of the color palette? Because going from 60s books this whole time to going to 2004 Marvel coloring.
Cinematic, glossy, a lot of effects. I thought it held up for a comic from the 2000s. There's been comics from the 2000s that I've read with digital coloring where I want to pull my hair out. But this looks great. I think it's aged well. Yeah, I could see where Marvel wanted... Like, you could read this as a movie, even down to the pacing. I mean, this reads fairly quickly.
Bendis' pacing, yeah, and for a deconstructionist like Bendis, or a decompressionist like Bendis,
yes,
who likes to stretch his things out, this issue is packed.
It breathes.
The coloring for me, I struggle with. I'll be honest.
Oh, really?
I think it's a little too muted. It's a little too muddy at parts. Where I would have liked, I don't mind grays, like gray tones and brown tones in the comics. What I think would have improved it a little bit is if they saturated the superhero costumes to contrast with the
gritty background.
Like these are larger than life characters in a very real world. I don't know. And that's a nitpick. Honestly, everything else you said about the story is true. The pacing is excellent.
I could see too where like someone I was really a step away from this, like someone like me that was reading like Ultimates or Ultimate Spider-Man, like I was a step away from picking up this book because there's not a lot to connect this to 616.
It was definitely designed as a jumping on point.
It was designed as a point to get people that are reading Ultimate onto 616.
Yeah, if you've never read Avengers before, don't worry. You don't need to have read any Avengers. Just read this. Everything you need to know is here.
Yeah.
And you open with Electro, again, being a Spider-Man fan, Electro shows up.
Love Electro. I was stoked. I was stoked when this,
and he's
when
like
he
the catalyst for the whole thing.
He is. He drives the plot. He frees the villains from the prison.
Right, and basically. Again, like connecting it to Earth's Mightiest Heroes, which deals with a power outage. It's interesting that like the literal electric villain is the cause for the power outage, and instead they changed it to a graviton.
Costume or no costume, we get that classic starfish mask.
I love that starfish mask.
I do too.
Every time they try to take it away, I'm like, why? Why do that?
It's John Byrne's fault. He did that Spider-Man Chapter 1 series, and he put him in the white and blue, which everyone complains about, but I thought was fine.
We'll add that to the long list of grievances I have against John Byrne. Anyway, so this issue, you wouldn't know it reading it. Well, maybe you would. There is a lot of seeds being planted for the entire New Avengers run that Bendis has. Like, you have this secret silhouetted character talking to Max Dillon at the beginning.
Yeah.
You get this
It's the deal. It's the deal to get him to attack the prison, basically.
And you get this great splash of him putting on that mask.
Loved it.
And then you cut to Rikers Island, and then just off the coast of Rikers is the Raft. And this is the first appearance of the Raft. The prison that features in Earth's Mightiest Heroes debuts here, and we see Matt Murdock, Luke Cage, and Jessica Drew and Foggy Nelson meeting at the Raft to meet with a client.
I thought he was Cyclops initially.
Of course you would, because you're an X-Men fan.
Yeah, and then I turned the page and I was like, oh, it's not. It's Daredevil.
Worth noting that at this time, Bendis was doing a very celebrated Daredevil run.
And he does show up.
Yeah. And at this point, he had been outed as Matt Murdock, so the world knew. And Matt Murdock's just trying to gaslight everybody, saying, no, I promise you, I'm not Daredevil. But anyway, we go into... this is a complaint I have about Marvel Unlimited. They go to double-page spreads, and you have to turn your device in order for it to have the real impact. Because when you read this book in physical form, like I did originally, and you turn to these double-page spreads...
There's a staple there.
Right. And it's really... I mean, they really have a different effect on you when you go from this big, full, in-your-hands double-page spread to like, oh, it's actually a smaller panel. Anyway, Luke walks by a monitor showing the Purple Man. And you can tell he just hates the Purple Man. And if you read Alias, or you've watched season 1 of Jessica Drew, you know exactly why. Or Jessica Jones. There I go. You know exactly why he hates him.
Bendis is having fun with his characters here.
Oh, man.
He's just like, this is my sandbox now.
Yeah, and he's got his own little corner that he's carved out with Daredevil and Jessica Jones and now the New Avengers.
And he does, and he features everyone. And then later we get... actually, I'm not going to say.
Okay, hold off on it.
I'm going to hold off on it.
We're going to try to go through it. There's a lot to cover, and this probably will go long because we want to cover the whole Breakout story. They go down to the sub-level, and as they're going down, the power goes out. And we know things are about to go crazy. And this really effective 4-panel page of Manhattan, and the power just rolling down, blacking out.
I like this shot of the elevator.
Yes.
Going down.
Yeah, we don't have page numbers. I guess it's page 6 maybe of the issue. Page 8 on the digital reader. But yeah, that really tall panel, it kind of breaks the usual like left-hand panel stacking is usually frowned upon as a story device. But the lettering does a lot of work here to help you. So it's really, really smart composition, honestly. And you really do get that effect of descending into the sub-levels with that long panel of the elevator. And this great 2-page spread of the Raft being hit with a lightning bolt. And then a cut to Peter and Mary Jane.
The page of the building's lights going out.
So good.
It is good and it works, and it's it is an example of this decompressed storytelling you brought
That's
up
a great
earlier,
point.
though, because it is like we're taking the time to show a building's lights going out, but it adds to the cinematic appeal.
Yeah, it adds to the cinematic appeal. I'd say it really it's kind of like this something bad's coming. It's like this
Right.
slow, like you can feel it as if it were a movie where it's like something's happening, things are going wrong.
Reminded me
things
of
are
the
getting worse.
Ultimates.
Sure,
Or
yeah.
Ultimate Spider-Man, especially like you said with Spidey showing up here.
Well, and again, you can't. Bendis will forever be associated with Spider-Man, and this is the only book where he writes Well, I shouldn't say that. Spider-Man probably does show up in Daredevil at some point, but this is where Bendis consistently writes 616 Peter Parker.
I was thinking about that as I was reading it, and it's Peter's married. Peter and Mary Jane are together. It's
Again, for context, this is during the J. Michael Straczynski run. This is the Peter from that era.
Yeah, Peter is a school teacher, and
Yes.
he's fighting Ezekiel and all the.
Yeah.
I love that run.
I need to read that run. You know why I don't read that run.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
We don't talk about it.
We don't talk about it. It's not the Mephisto thing, although that's also a reason I don't read. That
Don't take me back there, Kyle.
I'm not going to take that. Sorry. We get a really good shot of Spider-Man swinging to go save the day. But Carl, I noticed an art error, a storytelling error on this page.
Really? Where? Point it out to me.
Panel 1, he's swinging. Panel 2, he's like, okay, I'm ready to go. How am I supposed to get over there? Panel 3, he says, the webs only work if there's something to web to, and there's nothing to... And then the fourth panel, we see nothing. But in the third panel where he says there's nothing to web onto, there's a helicopter. I think the way this was supposed to read is that Peter says there's nothing to web onto, and then you get a shot of a helicopter flying into frame just at that moment. Mm-hmm. And then he says, all right, thwip. I think this panel is transposed with the panel that comes after it. I think it's supposed to be no helicopter, then helicopter.
I agree. And
it would read better. The joke would land better if that were the case.
And I was confused reading it. I had to flip back and forth because on the next panel he's riding off of the aircraft or whatever. But
right.
It doesn't come across when you read it the first time. I thought it was really confusing. It's just too many close-ups.
Yeah.
Like, it's the opposite of a Jack Kirby comic where, like, Jack Kirby shows you everything that's happening in the shot. In this, we have too many close-ups, and thus, I don't know what's going on with the shot, with the characters.
What do you know about David Finch as an artist, or his history or his background? Because I don't know a lot. I seem to have a sense that he's maybe from Top Cow or something like that.
That sounds right, but Finch has a wonderful YouTube series.
Oh, does he?
That he puts out for free where he illustrates characters and backgrounds, action scenes.
I need to check that out.
It's completely free and it's awesome, and I'm surprised he puts it out for free, but yeah, here a little bit of the storytelling is lost.
And that's partially on him. I'll put that partially on the editors too, because someone should have caught that transposed page.
Yeah.
Another thing I just want to mention, now that we're on the page where he's sailing on the back of this helicopter, the sound effects lettering, and I don't like doing this. I don't like being critical, but it just stands out to me, having come off of 60s hand-lettered comics that all use a very simple color palette. I think the reason this digital lettering stands out to me is you have this really dark, really rendered coloring on the art, and these very flat colors on the sound effects and display fonts for the
onomatopoeia.
The onomatopoeias, the hazahuzi that Peter's saying. Anyway, it just stands out to me as very of the time. But the lightning hits this helicopter, and you hear the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent talking to a captain on the helicopter. You don't see him. But he's being very encouraging to the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, so you know he's a good guy. And the reason he ends up being the good guy that you think he is because after Spider-Man pops his head up from the ocean and climbs onto the raft, he's greeted by Captain America in a very effective page turn once again. And this is the first Avenger that we've seen in this whole issue. Up until now we've seen Luke Cage, Daredevil, Spider-Woman, Spider-Man. None of these people have been proper Avengers at this point. And now an Avenger is on the scene. And so things are escalating. So again, after Captain America shows up and
it's a great shot of Cap when he shows up.
Shot.
It's just really dramatic. It's a great illustration on
it really
Finch's
is
end.
very, very effective with a good composition with the smoke plume behind him and the lightning bolt right next to it.
Looks good.
And Captain America is just reassuring Spider-Man that it's time to get serious. It's time to figure out what's going on. And meanwhile, Max Dillon goes into the heart of the prison and opens all the doors, and we get this incredible double-page spread of all these villains breaking out. And I wish I could tell you I knew all these faces. Some do carry over from the Earth's Mightiest Heroes episode. We have the UFOs, we have Griffin in there, but we also have characters like Armadillo, I see. That might be Vermin right there. Crossbones, the Controller is there. Jigsaw is there. Purple Man, who we mentioned earlier. Somewhere and Typhoid Mary is right there. Somewhere I'm sure someone has annotated this page, and I don't know who that person is, but
there is a ton of cameos. It's insane. I spent a little bit looking at it, but I'm not gonna lie, I don't know all the characters on this page.
Well, and again, as a consequence of the color palette that they're using, it's hard to kind of tell who's who necessarily. But
see Typhoid there.
We then cut back to Murdoch and Luke Cage and Jessica Drew and Foggy, and they've come to the prison cell of their client that they came to meet. And you turn the page, and at the end of issue 1, you find out that the person they've come to meet is the Sentry. And if you were reading comics in 2004, this was huge. Because one of the biggest, I'll say, spectacles of Joe Quesada's entry into his editor-in-chief role was the meta character of the Sentry. Where Paul Jenkins, who you had mentioned in a previous episode, I think it was episode 4, we had talked about Paul Jenkins. Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee co-created this Superman pastiche, the Sentry, who
he's definitely Marvel Superman.
They marketed him as a lost Stan Lee character from the Silver Age. And the conceit of the book was this Silver Age character, this all-powerful character, was wiped from memory. And it was a really good opportunity for Jay Lee to do some really meta art stylings where he was trying to mimic Bronze Age and 90s and modern age artwork and Silver Age artwork with his renditions of the Sentry. And then that book was kind of considered a standalone story that didn't directly get addressed in any mainstream Marvel books until New Avengers issue number 1, where he is brought in as a character.
But that was just a marketing gimmick. I mean, Sentry wasn't actually...
Right. For clarification, he was created in 2000 by Paul Jenkins. And
I was going to say, they did market it that way, but...
And it was a fun gimmick.
It was fun.
But really great series. I remember loving that book. Interestingly, Sentry here with overgrown hair and an overgrown beard in the sub-basement of the raft... And he's all powerful, but he's a protagonist, whereas in the Earth's Mightiest Heroes episode, the antagonist shared all those qualities.
They do. It's a similar ending where the issue ends with a reveal of a character.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that takes us to the end of issue 1. Issue number 2, we are continuing with
New Avengers
Breakout.
2.
Yes. And Electro flies off with somebody. We don't know who, but he flies off with somebody. And if you continue reading New Avengers, you find out who it is. If you're an X-Men fan, you appreciate who it is. But Spider-Man peeks out of the hole that Electro just crashed out of and sees all these supervillains. And there's this effect that Bendis and Finch do where they kind of have a villain show up and then they do like an insert panel that's black and white and it tells you the name and the superpower and kind of like their shtick in as few words as possible. So it's Count Lucino Neferia, Power Siphon, Organized Crime Leader. And again, I think this is hurt a little bit by the desaturated coloring because I don't think you get that full effect of like this kind of freeze frame black and white shot with that overly rendered kind of desaturated coloring. But I do love the storytelling gimmick of kind of like this freeze frame. Like it feels cinematic again, like you're pausing, getting a little breakdown of who this person is, and then moving on.
This dialogue, though, like where he speaks with the broken English, always with the funny from the villain where Spider-Man's fighting him.
Yeah.
I that took me out of the comic, and Bendis is known to do that, like try to imitate the characters' voices with like slang or something, but like that moment didn't age well for me.
Bendis speak is a thing where like you can put up a page of Bendis dialogue and you can tell who wrote it.
Sure.
Especially in 2004 when he was still kind of a young writer. And yeah, I think that happens throughout. This panel of Spider-Man getting carried by this mob of supervillains is really, I think, very impressive. Really good composition there. With a lot of depth and a lot of kind of chaos. That's
good use of foreground, middle ground, background. We see the back of a character's head in the foreground. We got Spider-Man in the middle ground, and then we got a character swinging their fist in the background. Kirby would be proud.
Good job, David Finch. And good lettering too. I'll say that sound really effective. And again, I think it's because
the lettering is aged better than Runaways.
Oh, I haven't revisited Runaways in a while.
The typography is very 2000s.
Oh, boy. Well,
but I am one of those people, I don't like lowercase in my comics. Like, I like it to be all caps.
Yeah.
I'm a purist in that
So,
way.
in that sense, how do you feel about the Ultimate line?
Did
you struggle with that?
They made some choices. I haven't seen those books in a really long time. Maybe we could look at them in future episodes, like maybe some issues of Ultimate Spider-Man or something. But
sure.
I haven't gone back in a really long time.
We'll definitely touch on some Ultimate books, especially covering Avengers like we are. But we cut back to the sub-basement level 7 with Sentry, and I feel like they must have just copied and pasted the panel from issue number 1 onto this page, because that looks almost down to the same line work. But a really creepy, effective entry of Carnage showing up.
Yeah, we got full page spread of Carnage. He's jumping Froggy Nelson from Daredevil. Daredevil's best friend, Matt Murdock's best friend, and it's a great full page spread, and it really encapsulates like the horror that's happening. I really like that image.
Feels like a xenomorph showing up.
Yeah, it was great.
And then another like freeze frame insert shot, which I think is more effective on this page because you have that bright light coming off of Jessica Drew's Zap and that more saturated red of Carnage with that red dialogue balloon, and then you get this black and white image. I think it's very effective. And so while Carnage is basically fighting off Luke Cage, Jessica Drew, and Daredevil, Foggy is locked in this closet. And then things are even more complicated when Mr. Hyde shows up.
Right.
And punches Daredevil. And I don't know, man. I don't think you stand up after Mr. Hyde punches you.
Especially the way he's depicted here. He's way taller than Matt Murdock.
I mean, Mr. Hyde, he's taken on some pretty heavy hitters. I don't know if Daredevil doesn't have a glass jaw, don't get me wrong. But... that surprised me. But if he's getting it bad, Spider-Man's getting it even worse, because on the next page, just all of these D-list and C-list and Z-list supervillains are just beating the crap out of him.
They're taking their turns. They're just beating up Peter for stuff he doesn't even remember.
And he's lost his mask at this point, which I think probably was another big to-do amongst message boards of the time.
I didn't think about it because it's like Peter loses his mask in every MCU movie.
Yeah.
And I'm so used to Peter just like revealing his identity at this point that it wasn't shocking. But back when this came out, it would have been somewhat shocking.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
Another great page, though, of Captain America with this shield zooming in and then him charging, breaking the panel border, and charging toward the reader, saying this ends now. Again, the one Avenger we've seen on the scene so far.
This could be an Image Comics page with like the vertical panel layout.
Sure,
like coming down. It reminds me, it's closer to that than like a classic 60s comic.
It is so jarring going from 1963 to 2004.
Maybe that's why I'm saying that.
Yeah, we're jumping a ton of comic book language development.
I feel like Todd developed the comics language of this page.
And I'd be interested in going, but like, I pictured David Finch working on something like The Darkness. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like he had to have worked for Top Cow. Or maybe he did some Spawn. I don't know. I would be interested in knowing. And then you turn to a very classic, I think, Bendis setup, where you just have this character, Foggy, talking in the dark, begging the Sentry to help.
A+ on Finch making all this dialogue interesting.
Yeah, really good acting from Foggy, and really good of zooming in on that face while he's just desperate for help.
It's great.
And as the Carnage Mr. Hyde duo kind of have this team on the ropes, you hear a crafoom, and this again another
Sentry.
vertical panel of the Sentry in this tattered costume. He looks haggard. It's just really, really good, effective looking.
That belt is huge. Only Sentry could support that belt.
That's you have to have the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns to be able to carry that belt.
Yeah, it's huge. And Carnage just goes at it. I mean,
Yeah, he
Carnage
doesn't
is
give a
trying
crap.
to kill this guy.
And in an infamous sequence, boom, 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 through the raft into the orbit,
Into outer space.
into outer space
and
in
he
zero
rips
gravity.
Carnage in half.
Rips Carnage in half. A joke that has followed the Sentry around to this day, where he's like, hey, he's just going to fly him into space and rip him in half. But like,
Fanboys were crying when this page came out.
Blew people's minds.
I hadn't read this like we said earlier, but I remember this page being online and people complaining about it because they were like, how could you Cletus Cassidy survive in space? You just killed Cletus Cassidy.
Where does
People were mad.
Where does this take place in relation to Maximum Carnage? When did Maximum Carnage happen?
Maximum Carnage was like 10 years before this.
Okay, I wasn't sure like where Carnage was in the minds of readers at this point, how
94,
involved he
95.
was, because peak Carnage was Maximum Carnage, and I just
Popularity,
yeah, as far as popularity goes, and
that miniseries doesn't hold up.
they just take him into space and rip him in half. And again, like, if you follow the Sentry and like if you read Siege, he rips Ares in half in a much more gruesome panel than this.
People were mad though. People were mad that Carnage got ripped in half in such a way.
And I don't know how many people. Again, this was designed for new readers. I don't know how many people knew who the Sentry was. So for them, this random character
Rips
grabs
Carnage
this
in half.
fan favorite villain and just jobs him, just takes him out.
And you have Spidey there, and Spidey doesn't even get to see him.
Oh, that's a great point.
Yeah, so
I bet that rubbed some people the wrong way.
Yeah, I could see where fans were mad.
So, Bendis liked poking the bear. I don't know.
He
So
definitely
anyway, the raft start we go back to Luke Cage, Spider-Woman, and Daredevil, and they start going underwater. And in what I think is a very gross thing to think about, they're actually swimming in the Hydra Man, who ends up showing up and complicating things. And they are almost drowned until Jessica Drew's able to pull them out of there. And then they all kind of converge on the surface. And this really good double-page spread of Spider-Man, Captain America, Spider-Woman, Daredevil.
The Avengers are starting to form
The
here.
new Avengers are starting to form.
Yeah.
But someone's missing, Carl. Someone's missing. And just before you think it's over, Cap is thrown by some character who I don't recognize. He's thrown away and caught by Iron Man. So another Avenger is on the scene. Significant because Captain America and Iron Man kind of become the legacy characters of the new Avengers.
Right.
And become the main source of conflict once Civil War happens in a couple of years. But here they're all gravy, baby. They're
fine.
There to help.
Along. They're bashing super crooks, and then we get this with tease at the end of Purple Man shows up again.
Yep.
And
to take over Luke Cage.
He's trying to sway Luke Cage's mind, and Luke Cage appears to be in a trance. And to be continued.
Interesting to note. This whole issue, we have those little cutaway inserts that I talked about, where it gives you the name, the power, and like the role of that villain.
Mm-hmm.
And they do it for Purple Man, but they don't desaturate it. They don't cut it to black and white. They keep the purple, and it's a bigger panel. Like Bendis is obviously positioning Purple Man as like, this is a bad guy. Like he's a problem. And again, if you've read any Bendis books up to this point, you understand why. But then we go to issue number 3.
New Avengers 3.
With Sentry on the cover, in space, probably he's got a haircut and beard, so it's obviously after he's ripped Carnage apart, but maybe he's just going to make sure he's still ripped apart. And we actually cut with a flash forward to Steve and Tony talking about...
We get a conversation with the classic characters.
Yeah.
We get Iron Man and Steve kind of talking it out.
Yep,
of the Avengers team and stuff.
They come at it with different opinions, where Steve's kind of seeing this sort of this sign from above that something's going on that they should be listening to. Like the universe is trying to tell them all these heroes came together to fight this threat. Maybe it means something. Tony's not so sure, but Steve's pretty convinced. And they talk about Luke Cage and the Purple Man, and we go back to the scene that we just left. And Purple Man's trying to control Luke Cage. But what do we find out, Carl?
We find out that Purple Man's powers aren't really working.
He's got a little bit of impotence with that mind control.
Despite the way it was illustrated last issue with Luke Cage's eyes wide open.
Even on this issue, the
zero effect.
That panel, it's not working. And he's like, hey, your powers don't work right now. You are drugged up.
I'll allow it. That's
fine. It ends. It leads to Luke Cage punching the crap out of Purple Man, which again, if you've been reading Alias, very cathartic. The only thing that would have been better is if that was Jessica Jones punching him.
He's threatening his wife and his kid.
Yep.
So Luke Cage is not having it. He's beating the crap out of Purple.
Fun fact, just to fact check you a little bit, Carl.
Okay.
New Avengers Annual number 1, the wedding of Jessica Jones and Luke Cage. So not yet married. But she is
on that,
pregnant at this point.
She is pregnant at this time. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for Marvelites.
No, it's okay. I just think it's really interesting, again, to put this in time and to illustrate the importance of the New Avengers title. Because I remember that annual very well. So anyway, Cap stops Luke Cage from going too far. And the conflict ends up resolving with a lot of them able to subdue the supervillains, but a lot of them also get away. 42 actually get away. Which again, the number 42 is significant for this time period in Marvel. Although I think it might be a coincidence that the 42 prison from Civil War has nothing to do with this.
It's similar to Earth's Mightiest Heroes, where a prison break happens, there's more villains on the loose, thus we need this new Avengers team.
Yeah.
Go clean up
Again,
the fight.
Great springboard for a series, and I think, unfortunately, things like Civil War and Secret Invasion and this run of events that happen starting in 2000, and House of M even, I think this run of events kind of derails the premise set up in Breakout. And we'll have to watch and see if that happens in Earth's Mightiest Heroes. But I really like it as a conceit for a show or a book that it's a really good setup.
Yeah, it is. It's effective to bring the team together,
And then Sentry comes back from orbit, no blood on him, so that's he kept Carnage's blood off.
He looks like Superman.
Yeah, hey, is that Superman? Superman's in this book.
The sky.
Yeah, descending in that very angelic pose.
The Superman pose.
And ultimately, Steve is able to convince Tony to at least think about it.
Hey, we're making a new Avengers team, buddy. I don't care if our mansion got blown up.
That's right. We'll just use your penthouse. So
yeah, there's a lot of drama there. A lot of the Marvel soap opera elements are here.
So Cap goes and visits a very beaten down Peter Parker outside of his house. He looks.
So is Peter a teacher here too?
He's a teacher here.
He's dressed like a teacher. He's got the tie. He's got
right. Yeah, as a former educator, I dress like this all the time. And after I got my ass beat by supervillains, I would still go to work with a sling on my arm, and no one would ask me questions. That's got to be a problem for administrators.
I feel like Peter would have said something about Carnage being killed, but hey.
Yeah.
Who am I to judge?
Really interesting that they totally... I love that you point that out.
They bypassed that. Such a huge part of Peter's history and just totally ignored.
But this is where where I mentioned before that they bring up Spider-Man as a loner actually being a feature, not a bug. Pardon the pun. I'm not a team guy. People hate me. I don't belong on a team. And Steve says, can I ask you something? How is that working out for you? The not being a team guy thing. And then you cut to this bruised up face of Peter. And
looks like John Romita. How John Romita would draw him.
Yeah, I see that. With the hair and that face.
It is. It's like a John Romita Peter.
Yeah, man. He really did define that character after Ditko left.
Oh, in a lot of ways, yeah.
And we get then after he's talked to Peter, he's going to move on to Luke, and we get a cameo from Jessica Jones, and Luke comes in and gets the same offer, and Luke's kind of surprised. But
he likes beating people up, so he'll join the team.
He's like, we did work really well. But he's got a caveat. He'll do it, but he intends to be heard because he has ideas about how things should be done and how the Avengers can change how they operate. And he wants to make sure that he gets a guarantee that his contributions will be heard and that they're not just going to do the same thing. And that's kind of one of the things that I think Steve wants, is he wants to do things a little differently. But not everything goes Steve's way, because Daredevil is not about to join the Avengers.
And Daredevil's the only superhero that hasn't agreed.
He's the holdout.
Avengers. Yeah, I hear this part's cool because it ties in with Bendis' Daredevil mythology,
Yep.
And I love how much. I'm not sure if people liked this at the time, but I love how much this issue's playing into Bendis' mythology of Marvel.
Yeah, Bendis really is, like we said, he is kind of making his own little corner, and he's fittingly keeping Daredevil out of it for now. Eventually, Daredevil will be in the new Avengers run later, but I think after Bendis left the Daredevil series.
Interesting.
Yeah, he loved Matt Murdock. So he brings in Jessica Drew next, who Spider-Woman, who's having some issues with S.H.I.E.L.D., who kind of they're doubting her abilities to function as a member of the organization since the Breakout happened under her watch. But they end up all meeting at Stark Tower. Established 2005. I think this is the first appearance of Stark Tower. Significant again because the MCU will borrow heavily from Stark Tower and Avengers Tower.
Base that as the Avengers headquarters.
And reminder to everyone at home, Bendis was on the creative committee that informed or consulted with Kevin Feige and
Whedon.
Jon Favreau and Joss Whedon to form the MCU.
Jarvis.
We get human Jarvis, which I wonder for modern readers if it would surprise them to know that Jarvis is not a computer, but is a butler. And again, I think this shows the difference between Earth's Mightiest Heroes comic influence compared to their MCU influence, because they use the AI version of Jarvis in the show. But I always loved Butler Jarvis.
It's fun.
And so they kind of all meet and they all agree, like, we're
doing this.
Do this together. We got some problems to solve. We got to catch these bad guys, and they're wondering, wait, there's someone not here. Where's Jessica?
Stairs are hard to draw, and David Finch does it well.
Yeah, you know what? The perspective shot on this 1 point perspective, it's a simple perspective shot, but it is good, and he's able to do all those steps. Spiral staircases are impossible for me to draw.
So this shot at the end, this is Jessica Drew, and she's talking to somebody off camera, saying, okay, so I have to do the same deal as before. I have to feed you information about S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers now. And she says, you're going to have to pay me more, or it's going to cost you more. Yeah.
And then it leaves you there to be continued. So she's going to be a mole within the new Avengers.
It's an interesting setup for the series moving forward. And, I can see all the tie-ins to Earth's Mightiest Heroes here.
Yes.
We have, the whole Prison Break premise is pretty prominent in the animated show. Kyle,
the conceits are the same.
Kyle, do you have any more thoughts on this?
No, we will come back to New Avengers as we cover Earth's Mightiest Heroes. They do revisit other storylines in the show, but this is noteworthy because the catalyst, the reason for coming together here is borrowed for the TV show, and it's an interesting comparison, an interesting exercise. But no, that's all I got. Carl, what do you have to promote for me, buddy?
Okay, you can find me at www.carllucasdraws.bsky.social. I have a book, Shogun Bear and the House of Horrors. It's a standalone graphic novel. And then also more mini comics, more comics to come. Kyle, do you have anything to plug?
Cornelius Armstrong, Adventures and Antics, Thunderduck, and Mad Science Rejects can all be found at kofi.com/kylewindle. You can also commission me there for any kind of art that you need hung on your wall, or if you're looking for a gift for somebody. Carl, Spider-Man's in this issue. Is your Spider-Man zine on your website? Are we allowed to talk about that?
It's kind of. I'm just gonna keep it on the underground for right now. It's not on my website now.
Find it at Genghis Con.
There is a Spider-Man zine. Find me at Genghis Con, Cleveland, at the Pivot Arts Center.
Anyway, when will this air? Will this air after you've gone to Genghis Con? We'll find
Probably.
out. Anyway,
I like having a historical record here.
I do too. I like it too. You go to way more shows than me. One day I'll go to more shows. Contact at IssuesWithCartoons.com with any comments, questions, or suggestions. We also are on social media, Instagram and on Twitter. And you can follow us on YouTube. Please tell people about us. Please give us feedback. We love to engage with you guys about what we're talking about. We are very excited for this content. We hope you share that excitement and share that excitement with your friends and family. Play our show at family dinner. Get your family involved.
Get everyone discussing Sentry ripping Carnage in half in space.
Yeah, I think I said kick-ass earlier, and I'm sure your little ones will love to hear that. All right, tune in next time, everybody. Bye.
Bye.